Hello, I am Krishnamurthy Pammi. In this session, we are going to discuss top 5 scenarios that are going to derail your sprint planning event. By going through this session, you will understand those top 5 problematic scenarios. For each of the 5 scenarios, we will discuss the symptoms or the patterns so that you can detect this scenario within your sprint planning event. What is the impact felt on the ground because of these patterns or symptoms in this scenario based on my experience on the ground? How to coach the teams towards better tomorrow so that we can take the teams towards productive sprint planning event. Let us learn these 5 scenarios in detail now. Let us first understand what is sprint planning event at the overall level. I assume each of you must be aware of sprint planning event, but I just wanted to give you an overview. A sprint is called a repetitive iteration, usually a 2 weeks time boxed iteration. It can be 1 week, it can be 3 weeks, it can be 4 weeks as well, but usually we follow a 2 week sprint cycle or cadence. So 2 weeks means 10 business days if you remove the weekends. So we are going to plan what we are going to do in the next one sprint. If we take an example of 2 week sprint, then what we are going to do in the next 2 weeks, that is 10 business days as part of this sprint planning event. The input is the product backlog. In Agile, we document requirements as part of user stories. User stories are written as a user, I want this functionality so that I can achieve this benefit. That means for each of the fundamental requirements, Agile mandates that we write who is going to request this requirement, that means who is the user, what is needed, and what is the benefit of these requirements. All these requirements are having the corresponding acceptance criteria. That means for each of the story, the acceptance criteria is matched. For example, what is the expected functionality? What should not happen? What should happen? What are the boundary cases? All these situations, they are clubbed as part of acceptance criteria and they are mapped to each of the user story. So this user story represents a specific requirements and all these requirements are clubbed or documented as part of product backlog. Whatever is there in the product backlog, only those things team will do. So each requirement and corresponding acceptance criteria is written as part of product backlog and they are prioritized based on return on investment. The next input for sprint planning event is capacity and velocity. The velocity is the number of story points that team could able to achieve sprint on sprint. Similarly, the capacity is the amount of time or the % days of effort available for the team for the upcoming sprint. So, upcoming business days minus public holidays minus the number of expected leaves from the team gives you the capacity. Similarly, the another input is the definition of done. When somebody says that a story is done, then team expects whatever is written within the definition of done are met. Similarly, the other constraints the team have before starting the sprint and the definition of ready. So definition of ready means the product owner need to make sure that the stories are adhering to this criteria mentioned within that definition of ready. So by keeping the product backlog, capacity, velocity, constraints, definition of done, that is DOD, taking these inputs, we basically get onto a sprint planning session. The sprint planning session happens at the beginning of the sprint. It has 2 parts. Part 1 is what. That means the product owner calls the team and Scrum Master will be there and he explains each story. That means this is the story. As a user, I need this functionality so that I can achieve this benefit. So he explains the stories in that format and he also explains the acceptance criteria for each of the stories.
So in that session, that in session 1, the team members ask specific questions to product owner. So it's basically unfolding the requirements. The sprint planning part 1 is usually a beautiful session where the product owner brings the stories to the sprint planning part 1, and team members asks, the conversations basically unfold a beautifully drafted user stories. Now, once the product owner brings certain stories, means whatever stories are there in the product backlog, for example, he may think that, okay, these are the 5 stories I wanted to prioritize for the team for the sprint. Then the team understands what is that story and what is the acceptance criteria for those stories as part of session 1. And then they go back to session 2 and they basically break down those stories into fundamental tasks, and they estimate the amount of hours for each of the tasks, and they come up saying that, okay, this is the total amount of hours it takes and we have this capacity, so we can take these many stories only. So the team decides out of 5 stories a product owner prioritizes for a sprint, for example. The team members can say, okay, these are the only 4 stories I can take it up because I'm only having this much capacity available. So everybody has to respect that. So at the end of the sprint planning session, you come up with sprint goal and sprint backlog. Sprint backlog is nothing but the amount of stories the team is committing for that sprint. So this is the overview of sprint planning event. As part of this webinar, we will be discussing the top 5 scenarios that can derail your sprint planning outcome. The first scenario is overcommitting. That means stretch goals. The scenario is overcommitting to stretched sprint targets that exceeds team's available capacity. Let us understand the patterns or key risks for this scenario. The first one is the product owner is unable to say no to stakeholders when required. So it is like whenever key stakeholders or influential stakeholders brings up certain stories to product owner and they pressure him to include those stories within the sprint, he will say yes. He's a yes man. He doesn't know how to say no. Even if he says no, then other people already knows that he's a little bit soft guy, so we can put some pressure on him. So ultimately, the product owner is unable to say no to stakeholders and everybody is trying to push their stories to the team. So that's the pattern. That's the risk. Similarly, the recent velocity trend was not given due importance while deciding the sprint goal. The second pattern is, in this case, the product owner is kind of a dominating person. Probably he is having the support of senior management. Okay. And he says, look guys, I have understood you in the previous sprints where, not enough work is there, but now I wanted to say this sprint you have to work. He uses some soft techniques or soft tactics to make sure that, he gets the team accept the stories that he wants the team to carry on. He does not recognize, or the team members also does not recognize, or even Scrum Master does not recognize the recent velocity. That means how many story points a team could able to clock through in the previous sprints. They won't take any reference to that. They just accept based on certain emotion or certain intuition. There's a next pattern that can derail, or that can tell you that the scenario of overcommitting is actually onsetting to your sprint. The third one is the sprint goal requires more effort than available team capacity. So at the end of sprint planning part 2, the team says, I can't accept it because I don't have that much effort or capacity, but still at the planning itself, more number of stories are being pushed to sprint backlog. So that's the third scenario. The next scenario is the definition of done is not set to current quality bar and is not considered while estimation. It can so happen that the stakeholders' expectations are increasing day by day, thereby their quality bar is increasing day after day. But your definition of done, your means the team definition of done is still the same. So if you don't refer definition of done, which is the quality bar, or if you don't update your definition of done that meets the current stakeholder expectations, there is less probability that you deliver the stories meeting the quality bar, meeting the expectation of the stakeholders. Similarly, the next pattern is the risks identified by certain team members are not factored into. There can be certain team members who are soft spoken, or they're not much experience within the team, or they can be dominated. That means other people can dominate them. So even though they raise risks during sprint planning conversations, other team members won't take any reference to that, or they won't give weightage to that. So that is another pattern you can understand. The last one is team is pushed to accept unreasonable targets. As I said, people use tactics to ensure that team is signing up for a big goal than what it can achieve or what it can aim, okay, at the beginning of the sprint. So these are the patterns or symptoms or the negative risks that can make you feel that the scenario of overcommitting, the scenario of stretch goal is onsetting to your sprint planning session. Let us understand the impact felt on the ground because of these symptoms or risks given my experience. The first one is the sprint goals are slipped, keep on getting slipped. That means you set a goal and you don't meet it. The team sets a goal, they don't meet it. Okay, they sign up for 10 stories, but they end up delivering 4 stories. And even within those 4 stories, whatever they have delivered, there's a poor quality, because quality is nothing but stakeholders' expectations, and your definition of done is not current. So the team does not know the clear quality bar, the corresponding acceptance criteria for each of those user stories are not written properly. The definition of done is not properly mentioned or documented. So because of which, when you deliver the stories, then your product owner or the stakeholders, they're not happy. So they keep on complaining about the quality problems. Stakeholders are not happy. Because of which, you can observe low morale among the team members. Friends, please understand, on ground, you are not just carrying the task of execution, you're also carrying the emotions of people. They attach their credibility to it. When you keep on slipping on the target, it's high probability that the team members are showing less interest towards our project. So low team morale is the another impact that you can observe when this risk of overcommitting or stretch goals are onsetting to your sprint goals or sprint planning event. So the team is not showing interest towards agile events. So this is what is the impact felt on the ground based on my experience. Now, how to help them through? How to coach the team? The first one is we need to coach the product owner to assertively say no to stakeholders when necessary. Yes, stakeholders will try to push from their end, but the product owner should be in a position, okay, if you push these many stories onto my bucket, I end up delivering less stories. Is it okay with you? And you will complain tomorrow that quality is not good, and I will incur the team attrition. So it is not good. So he needs to logically or assertively interact with the stakeholders. Thereby, he should convince stakeholders saying that you are pushing more onto my court and I can't accept it. So that should be an assertive way of saying no. As you know, we need to learn the art of saying no. The second one is we need to coach the stakeholders. Like, guys, it's a sprint. It's a 2-week sprint. Okay? There is certain thing that team can take care. So you need to respect the data-driven reasons. You need to take data-driven decisions. And you also need to provide clear acceptance criteria to the team. It is not that when you come to the sprint planning session, you give the stories with less or moderate acceptance criteria, but when team delivers the stories, you expect with high quality bar. The statements like, I told you, it doesn't work. You have to write the acceptance criteria clearly. What is the positive cases? What are the negative cases? What are the boundary cases? What are the interfacing cases? All those cases you need to mention as part of the acceptance criteria. We need to coach the stakeholders. Then we also need to help the team to estimate, because estimation is an art. Okay, so we need to help the team or coach the team to estimate, keeping the past historical performance, the definition of done, the capacity available at the hand, and identified risks. So we need to coach the team to estimate properly, and how to identify risks and incorporate into planning is also another art. Every assumption you make may be a source of a risk. So you need to help the team members to ensure that you know how to identify risks, how to evaluate the existing risks. Whatever are moderate risks, are they going to high priority risks? Whatever are low priority risks, are they shooting up to high priority risks? Whatever high priority risks, can it be turned down to low risk because we don't see those scenarios now? So it's all about, we need to help the team to identify, to re-evaluate, to reassess the existing risks. Now, the next one is, you need to make sure that your definition of done is kept to current and it is meeting the quality bar expected by the stakeholders. As I said, the stakeholder expectations increasing day after day. Hence, based on their expectation, the quality bar also increases. So your definition of done also need to ensure that it meets those standards. At the same time, the acceptance criteria is clearly written in such a way that for each of the user story, the clear expectation of stakeholders, at the same time, the technical expectation of user story, performance wise, non-functional requirements wise, all aspects are taken care. Interfacing requirements wise, all those aspects are taken care while writing the acceptance criteria for each user story. Now, making release and sprint information radiators visible to the stakeholders. We have to make sure that on the wall, the burn down charts and release burn down, sprint burn down, all those radiators are clearly visible on the wall. Formal and informal coaching to the team to pass through this phase. Friends, there are two aspects. One is whole team coaching, another is informal team member coaching. Whole team coaching is something that you do in the formal events like sprint planning event, product backlog refinement, sprint retrospectives, sprint reviews. During those scenarios, you do a whole team coaching. But individual team coaching is something you do invisibly, that we will come to know in the later part of the slides. So using these techniques, you can actually help the team to overcome this scenario called overcommitting or stretch goals. The second risk is prioritized product backlog is not available. Yes, it may look like, very silly and funny, but that's true. On the ground, you come across situations wherein sprint planning meetings, events are held without a prioritized product backlog. What are the negative risks for this? Number one, product backlog refinement sessions are skipped. Only sprint planning events are organized. Product backlog refinement sessions are not at all given any importance. 80% of the stories that team is asked to take up for a sprint, the team is coming to know about those stories during this first day of a sprint planning day. If 80% of the stories are groomed at the beginning of the sprint planning that are completely new to the team, it clearly says that the product owner does not have a prioritized product backlog. Product owner is responsible for high return on investment. If he brings stories on the day of the sprint planning, 80% of the stories are very new to the team members, then how can he ensure the overall product that team is building is actually meeting the high return on investment? It is highly probable that whatever is available for him or for her, the product owner, he or she is bringing the stories to the team meeting at that point in time. You don't have prioritized product backlog with you. You are just bringing some stories for the team. It is not acceptable because the team effort is not aligned with high return on investment. So the third symptom is team decides majority of the stories. There are certain scenarios wherein product owner want to be goody goody. He says, look, I and you are friend and friend. Okay, you can bring stories to the product sprint planning session. So team members, based on certain senior people's advice, they bring up certain stories. As long as you just write those things in the required format and in the required tools, I'm fine, I'm with you. So it's funny that team members, they need to bring a less number of stories. For example, they are eligible to bring up stories technical wise or business wise also, but the stakeholders or user perspective or the management perspective voice is not visible there. Okay, bottom up is fine, but top down is also required. At the end of the day, the product owner need to capture the voice of the stakeholders, and he needs to make sure that team writes or team spends their effort on high return on investment. But if he keeps observing or he keeps allowing only the stories from the ground, then it's just that you're filling certain stories for the team, for the sprint. He just the product owner doesn't want to get labeled as if he did not bring the required stories for the team for the sprint. So these kind of scenarios I observed. So this is not correct. Similarly, the product owner prioritizes immediately visible stories to the team, and product owner prioritizes demanding stories that other teams are chasing him or her. It can be a scenario wherein other teams are dependent on our team. So those product owners will put pressure on our product owner, saying that, if you don't complete this story, I can't proceed. So basically he's always in a hurry model, hurry situation. So these are the patterns that can help you detect, saying that you don't have a prioritized product backlog with you. The product backlog you are having, but that is not aligned with high return on investment. Now, how to help the team or what is the impact felt on the ground? The return on investment is at stake. The team effort and team output is not aligned with overall product goals, and team members also shows low level of interest. Friends, when team aligns their effort with higher goals, higher business goals, then they also will get motivation. It's just not the salary that makes them happy. It also that we are aligned with higher goals within the organization. We are contributing to major return on investment. That is something that keeps their morale also a very happy mood. So when ad hoc things are happening, they will also lose interest towards this sprint planning event. So this is what is the impact felt on the ground in my experience. Let us now understand how to help the team. First thing is we need to coach product owner on how to do prioritization. There are n number of techniques. One of the technique is Moscow. What are the must do features? What are the should do features? What are the could do features? What won't fit it into a current sprint? Similarly, there are n number of prioritization techniques. So we need to help the product owner to understand the product backlog prioritization. We also need to coach the Scrum Master so that the product backlog refinement sessions are not skipped. The product backlog refinement session happens at the mid of the sprint, because at the mid of the sprint, the team is not at a pressured situation. So we time box certain hours from the team so that, the product backlog is, updated. New stories are added, existing stories are split. Okay, priorities are reset. So that is the time box duration, some amount of duration we take so that the product backlog refinement sessions are happening. Thereby, we can actually do 80% of the stories getting groomed during the mid of the sprint for the upcoming sprints. So whenever we come to sprint planning session, 80% of the stories already we groomed, we know about it. Only probably 10 to 20% of the stories anyway, because change is certain. So 10 to 20% of the new stories team is exposed to, but 80% of the stories, whatever they are hearing, they are available to them or they are knowledgeable about them before, because Scrum Master is ensuring that product backlog refinement sessions are happening in the spirit. The third one is, as I told, ensure 80% of the stories are coming from the past product backlog refinement sessions. As I said, whenever you're going for sprint planning session, if let's say 10 stories are tabled by the product owner for the team. 8 stories we already know because they have been groomed in the previous product backlog refinement sessions. So 2 to 3 stories, okay, the new stories he's bringing. Thereby, you are not exposed to altogether new functionality. Similarly, the team retrospectives and periodic product owner cross-connect meetings are happening. So the product owner cross-connect is also very important. Or the product owners are talking to each other. Are they aligning with overall product goals? That's also very important, so that we can ensure that product owner is driving only those stories that gives high return on investment, so that overall product value, whatever is expected, we are able to achieve as a team and as a group of teams. So this is the second scenario. The third scenario is poor participation from team members. They don't show interest. The pattern is certain team members, they dominate in the sprint planning event. I mean, they are the heroes. They are experienced people by birth. They are dominating people, and they spend more amount of time on the ground. So they dominate. I come across scenarios wherein certain experienced people. You know what? I always give less amount of hours, because you always apply more buffers. I make sure that this can be done in less amount of time, but you take 50% more. See, it is debatable, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure that medium capable person can able to achieve within those hours. So that domination is something that you need to coach as a scrum master or an agile coach, either offline coaching, individual coaching, or whole team coaching. Similarly, you see that certain team members are always silent. Probably they're silent because by culture they're like that, or they may come across to the conclusion saying that even if I talk, nobody listens to me. Hence, it's better I keep quiet because my inputs are anyway will not be taken. So such kind of mindset can be there. The third thing is certain team members are absent. So they're absent by quoting several reasons. Certain things can be genuine, but certain things can be understood. And other members brings laptops to the sprint planning event so that there is no proper engagement. So these are the patterns or negative risks. So impact felt on the ground is some user stories are not fully clear to the team. Yeah, when there is no engagement, how do you ensure that team members understand the user stories and the corresponding acceptance criteria? And user stories are often estimated wrongly because you have not taken the input of every team member. Only 1 or 2 individuals speaks there. So the stories are most probably are estimated wrongly, either on the left side or on the right side. That means either extreme less or extreme top. The sprint goals are often slip and low team morale. So teams are not happy. How to coach the teams? Formal and informal coaching. Effective retrospective supported with right data and participation. See, this is something that I come across. The Scrum Master just goes with a list of sticky notes to the retrospectives. That's fine, but you need to do some groundwork. You need to make sure that a data-based artifacts you are taking to the team retrospectives. You have to make sure that your team experiences the value from you, saying that, oh God, he's basically bringing up certain patterns of past data. Yeah, it is worth thinking through, worth discussing through. Such kind of brilliant preparation the Scrum Master need to do, and so that data-based decisions and right participation happens. And we also need to conduct workshop on how to estimate user stories. There is another concept called coaching at the whole team level and individual team levels. So whenever these formal events, like at the beginning of the sprint, you have a sprint planning event. Okay, at the end of the sprint, you have a retrospective and your sprint review. So if you see here, the whole team coaching by the agile coach or the Scrum Master happens at the beginning or at the end. In the mid, the whole team coaching pauses because they're busy completing their stories. Only during daily stand-up you can get a glimpse of them. But individual coaching is something that agile coach or Scrum Master need to do. Okay, let's have some cup of coffee. How do you think this is progressing? What do you think is the reason for this? As a coach or a scrum master, you need to ask the right questions. Ask questions. Why? Because you have to articulate your questions in such a way that the individual understands the improvement by himself. That's the art of right questioning. Because if a coach or scrum master will tell the solution on their own, the acceptability of those suggestions by the individual team members may not be that much. So you have to connect to the team members, maybe in the coffee session or lunch session or walking together. So the real coaches, they do this individual coaching superbly, and the team members may not even be knowing that they are being coached. In an invisible way. For example, like, can we go for a walk? What do you think are the problems you're facing? Why do you think we did not meet the sprint goal? What do you think that those user story is very big and we have still taken? So like this, you have to ask questions. So that's why the individual coaching gets on to the peak level during the mid of the sprint, because the agile coach or scrum master takes their time during this time, informal way. So we need to leverage the options of whole team level and individual level. Both levels of coaching we need to leverage to ensure that this risk of poor participation is taken care. The next scenario is sprint planning meetings takes more time than stipulated. For example, in a scenario where your sprint planning meeting should be completed within 3 hours, you end up spending 5 hours. The scrum master or the product owner or certain power people in power can say, okay, it's okay if we take more time, but we need to make sure that all user stories are properly understood and team members provide their thought. That's okay. It's okay if we cross more time. That's okay. But the point I'm trying to say is, if you keep on taking more time for the time boxed events, then team members loses their interest. Even I've seen this daily meetings also taking half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour. In every day, 1 hour you spend for just daily status meeting, and I think we need to optimize that. So the sprint planning meeting need to be time boxed and it should not take more time. But if it is taking more time, what are the risks? 80% of the stories groomed for sprint planning are completely new for the team. As I said, the team is not leveraging the product backlog refinement sessions. Every time the sprint planning event comes, 80% of the stories are groomed for the first time. The team members are coming to know about those stories for the first time. The product backlog refinement sessions are often skipped. Despite more time spent, the less stories are groomed, because there are certain individuals you come across on the ground, they ask questions. Certain times it will be relevant. Certain times they want to show their ego. Certain times they want to make sure that their knowledge is being experienced by the whole team there. So instead of being productive, it becomes non-productive, because it becomes a competent discussion on the ground. Then I know this, you know this. People tend to use their talent in such a way that one intersects other in a wrong way, and discussion keeps on going. That is where you need an effective scrum master. This is where you need to refer your team rules. Okay, so we agreed that a scrum master can show a green card, yellow card, a red card, and scrum master is showing that, so you have to respect me. This kind of discussions we can take it offline. Or certain times you need to include team friends who can actually do discussions with a positive attitude. Thereby the powerful people, the technically strong people within our team are positively contracted with those talented technical persons from the other team. So we have to do certain techniques, but at the end of the day, the product backlog refinement sessions takes long time and less stories are groomed. Okay, then yes, I said the certain team members dominates in the sprint planning event. Okay, now what is the impact felt? The rejected mood on low participation levels. You know what I'm telling you, within a team, you need to bring relevance while talking. Find 1 minute or 2 minutes or at max 5 minutes. If you talk certain thing that is not relevant to me as an individual team member, that's fine. But if you keep on talking about something that I don't know for a long time, I get a rejected mood. I don't understand what are you talking. I just only know that you both are talking or debating, but that is something you can take it offline. But if you can't stop it, you will see the rejected mood on the ground. Similarly, the insufficient stories are groomed during the sprint planning event. Yes, that's obvious because the attitude also matters to our altitude. Attitude is our altitude. If you have positive attitude, you have a greater altitude. If you have less wrong attitude, you have less altitude. So insufficient stories are groomed during the sprint planning event, and low productivity and velocity is clocked. So how to help the teams to overcome this? Coach the product owner, scrum master, with clear acceptance criteria, and how to prepare for the sprint planning event. Similarly, you have to coach the scrum master and facilitation skills. Some of the things that I have tried on the ground is the product owner, he publishes the list of the stories he wants to groom in a sprint planning event 1 day before or 2 days before to the team. So the team goes through those stories. They do also their groundwork so that only the required questions they will ask in the sprint planning events. Thereby, you can see that more number of stories you can groom. So this kind of practice I have suggested on the ground, and thankfully the product owner and the team respected that, and we suddenly see more number of stories are getting groomed in less span of time in product backlog refinement sessions or sprint planning events. Similarly, product backlog refinement sessions are conducted with a spirit. As I said, the product backlog refinement session happens at the mid of the sprint, and we ensure that product backlog is refined, updated as per the priority and return on investment, high return on investment, so that 80% of the stories whatever the product owner is bringing to the sprint planning event, the team is aware of it. Only 20% of the stories, 10 to 20% of the stories are new stories, because change is inevitable, so we can't expect everything. But 10 to 20% of the new stories is acceptable. But if you leverage the product backlog refinement sessions, then there's high probability that you can help the team to mitigate this risk. The last scenario is the large size user stories are prioritized. 20 story points, 13 story points. Certain times I've seen even bigger stories, bigger size stories are also being prioritized, and team is accepting this. What is the pattern is the team signs up for large user stories frequently, and they often identify. So what happens is, as they take up that large size user story, as they work along, they come across more scope for the user story, and they end up not meeting the sprint goal. And also they say, look, we have not come across this scenario, we did not assume like this, kind of a thing. And new user stories and they uncover, and team on the ground says, look, my product owner has added more stories for us. Then Scrum Master goes to the product owner, why you have added more stories? This is something that we have not agreed during sprint planning event. This product owner says, look, I have not added any stories. Your team came back to me and said, look, to complete this, we need to complete these stories also. So that's why I have added those stories also. So often you see conflicting versions from product owner as well as the team, saying that, team says the product owner has added more stories during the sprint, whereas the product owner says, I have not added. The team on itself came back and said, to complete this large size item, we uncovered this scope and we have to complete it. That's why I said, okay. So these are the patterns or symptoms that you come across when you see large size user stories are being signed up by the team. Okay. How to come across this? Other patterns are some user stories that are not fully clear to the team or prioritized. Okay, so technology wise or domain wise, they're not clear, either in terms of clarity in requirements or feasibility wise also, they're not very confident. Such kind of stories are being prioritized. So insufficient interactions are happening while grooming the stories, and they don't do, product owner and team, they don't do their groundwork before the planning event. These are the symptoms. How to come across, or what is the impact felt? First thing is the sprint goals are being slipped. More stories are carry forwarded for upcoming sprints. So you keep on saying the sprint by Scrum Master, he keeps on forwarding those stories from first sprint to next sprint to next sprint. The story is getting forwarded. low productivity, and poor quality of the deliverables. So how to help them? First thing is you have to coach the team how to split the user stories to fundamental level with clear acceptance criteria. We need to conduct a user story workshop for them. Definition of ready is set to the current, because only when these norms are set, then only the team members accept the story. When team members are not clear about certain items, then it's not definition of ready. So definition of ready should be clearly described, accepted upon, agreed upon, and it has to be implemented. Everybody has to respect it. Similarly, definition of done is also set to the current standards. Similarly, how to groom user stories with a clear acceptance criteria is also something that we need to coach the teams. Okay, so the next thing is the coach the team or coach the scrum master on facilitation skills, so that the realistic sprint goals are set. Similarly, as I said, product owner upfront publishes the stories so that the team members does their groundwork, and product backlog refinement sessions are conducted regularly. And similarly, the team members has to leverage stories. For example, there are certain stories, research stories. So people have to say that some whenever they are not very clear about a story, they can do certain research on it, and they can come back with the outcome, and then they can actually sign up for the user story. So instead of signing up for the large user story, you can do certain research on top of it. You can keep your hands dirt, and you can do certain prototype to understand the technical feasibility, and then sign up for the user story. So when you do the groundwork, when you do the required research, when you take a research story, then it's high probable that you will be in a position to split the user story to fundamental level, and thereby you can come across or thereby you can overcome this particular risk. So what did we learn? The top 5 scenarios in my experience. First one is overcommitting to stretched sprint targets that exceeds team's available capacity. Second is sprint planning meetings are held without a prioritized product backlog. Poor participation from team members. Sprint planning meetings takes more time than stipulated. Team often ends up signing for large story pointed stories during a sprint as part of their sprint goals. These are the top 5 scenarios in my experience. I feel they can derail your sprint planning event. As you know, for each of these 5 scenarios, we have understood the patterns or the negative risks or the symptoms, so that you can understand the onsetting of these respective scenarios within your sprint. And we also discussed the impact felt on the ground, and we also learned the coaching techniques, how to help team to drive for a productive sprint planning event, thereby for a better tomorrow. So the key takeaways from this session is these scenarios, if you come across within your sprint planning event, then ensure that you adopt these learnings, and you educate your team members, saying that, look, I am observing these symptoms or negative risks. This means that this kind of scenario is going to derail our sprint planning event. These are the coaching techniques that we can actually help the team to set them onto the right track, so thereby you can do a preventive steps. Second is retrospect and contribute to productive sprint planning events through excellent team engagement, because team engagement is very important. Finally, the very thought that how something can go wrong can trigger a beautiful thoughts, not just for sprint planning event, but all other agile events. Look, everybody will say, this is how this needs to be done. That's one way of learning. The other way is, these are the don'ts. If you do these don'ts, you will be on the wrong side. So the very thought that how something can go wrong actually can make you on the right track wisely.
I thank your interest to learn, and I look forward to add more value add sessions in future. Thank you.